Back, aside from Israel's role as a strategic ally in the Middle East, what is it about the United States that so many Americans and so many Republicans are firmly in Israel's corner? Here's senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns.
It isn't often you see conservative Republican Senators Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and Jim Inhofe on the same page as liberal Democrats like Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland and House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer. But that's how it works when it comes to Israel. In part, the pro-Israel fervor is due to support by evangelical Christians, who make up half of Republican primary voters. A Pew poll from 2013 said almost twice as many white evangelicals, 82%, believe God gave the land of Israel to Jewish people, compared with only 40% of American Jews who believe the same thing. The evangelical support can be traced back to the book of Genesis, which says of the people of Israel, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Pastor and televangelist John Hagee from a megachurch in Texas has made a name for himself in this movement.
These young men and
in this video released 2 weeks ago on YouTube, recorded on the Israeli border with Israeli troops standing behind him, Hagee makes his case.
I'm saying this as an American citizen to all American citizens. If there was ever a time to stand up and speak up for Israel, it's right now.
The Christian
Palestinian health officials say a UN school in northern Gaza has been attacked by Israeli tanks. Harry Fear, he's in Gaza. He's got the latest.
Well, this incident follows another heavy night of bombardment in Gaza. We understand over 120 Palestinians were killed last night. Just in the last couple of hours, we've heard this incident of the United Nations school being used as a shelter hit by Israeli tank shells. We understand more than one shell hit. First, the courtyard, and also secondly, part of the school, which is primarily used by the girl pupils. We understand that civilians were, of course, sheltering in these areas. This shelling of a United Nations school constitutes the second act of violence against a UN school in less than a week. Last Thursday, a United Nations school in the north of the Strip in Beit Hanun was struck in similar circumstances. Of course, under contention with regard to Israel and Hamas, both obviously giving different explanations for the violence. But certainly on the ground, we're seeing again continued hostilities, of course, and this is another significant incident. Now, over 5 United Nations schools have been caught up in the fighting, which is now, of course, beginning to move now onto its 23rd day. Well, yesterday we saw another significant incident, which was the targeting of the fuel tanks belonging to Gaza's Seoul power station. Gaza has been suffering from fuel and electricity crises on and off for several years since the Israeli and Egyptian imposed siege began. This now is obviously only going to worsen the electricity crisis for civilians here in the Strip. Well, we've been catching up with some of those hit most horrendously with awful injuries in Gaza's main hospital, the Al-Shifa hospital.
The Zionist movement has been controversial, not because of the politics, but because of its forward-looking theology. Many evangelicals believe that the land of Israel will play a key role in the future, the final battleground between good and evil until the end of the world, at which time the believers will be raptured or taken away to heaven. Back in 2006, when I interviewed Pastor Hagee, here's what he said about rapture and the Jews.
The Jews who you support are raptured up too?
No. The rapture is exclusively for the church.
But over the years, the theology has changed. What once sounded like the church encouraging conversion of Jews to Christianity has been revamped and revised. In an op-ed in the Jewish daily Forward.com in 2010, Hagee writes, "Some worry that our efforts are motivated by a desire to convert Jews. Others posit that our Zionism is tied to the speed of the second coming of Jesus. Both of these allegations are flat wrong." The change in doctrine may help some Jews overcome their historic suspicion of evangelicals. But in D.C., where politics makes strange bedfellows, supporters of Israel aren't taking anything for granted. Joe Johns, CNN, Washington.
Appreciate that, Joe Johns. I'm joined now by Peter Beinart, CNN political commentator and a columnist for Haaretz. Mark Lamont Hill, CNN political commentator Alan Dershowitz, longtime supporter of Israel and the author of Taking the Stand, My Life in the Law.
It's hard to fathom how such vast devastation can occur in 3 weeks of fighting. Thousands of homes damaged or destroyed, tens of thousands internally displaced, well over 1,000 killed. Inside Gaza's main hospital, in its burns unit, are a small fraction of the surviving injured.
This girl, 3 years old, the Israelis demolished their house of this family. So we received the girl, her mother, 2 brothers with severe burns this morning.
This woman is in a very severe condition, obviously.
She is. She presented to us about 5 days ago with her son and her husband. Her son and husband died with severe, massive burns, and she's still surviving with a very critical condition.
The doctors and nurses here look as stunned as the civilians who've survived in heavily bombarded areas. It's hard to imagine how the medical staff can cope with these truly horrendous cases.
I'm a human being. If I see whole families killed under the rubble of their house, the house is demolished on these people, and all the family is killed. In one of the instances, I had a child here. He was all the time crying because he lost all his families. He lost his father, his mother, his brothers, his grandfather, and all the time he's crying he wants his father, his mother. So I closed the door of my office and I sat crying here.
Those that survive this war will have to bear the physical and psychical scars for years to come.
You guys are back, and so I know it will be an interesting conversation again. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Peter, to you first. I want you to take a look at a recent CNN ORC poll. 60% of Americans have a favorable view of Israel, but if we break that down along party lines, Republicans sympathize with Israel more than Democrats, a difference of 18 points. Why is that, Peter?
I think it's because, although most Democrats support Israel's right to exist, Democrats are more willing to acknowledge that there are real human rights concerns about Israel's control of the West Bank, where Jews have citizenship, the right to vote, live under civil law, while Palestinians lack citizenship, lack the right to vote, and live under military law. I think because of their generally progressive points of view and sympathy for the underdog, I think Democrats, while still supporting Israel's right to exist, are less likely to support Israel's undemocratic control of the West Bank.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the same for elected officials, because elected officials overwhelmingly, I think, support Israel. Don't you think?
Is that for me? Yes, I think yes. You don't find that same division, public division, reflected amongst politicians, and I think that's largely because for a very long time now, the safe political move has been basically to define being pro-Israel as supporting the positions of the Israeli government. What I wish Democrats and Republicans would do is define being pro-Israel as supportive of the principles of Israel's Declaration of Independence, which call for complete equality of social and political rights, irrespective of race, religion, and sex. That's the Zionism that I believe in.
Okay, I want to put up one other poll. Alan, I want to direct this to you. This is according to a Gallup poll, right? Younger Americans are far less likely to say that Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip are justified. The younger they are, the less support that they have for Israel's actions. Why would that be?
Well, I think the hard left has taken on Israel as a project, and to be invited into the hard left, mostly it's the anti-American, anti-Western left. You have to hate Israel,
but for
and
younger
you have
voters?
to support Hamas. This is true of people of the left. Now, people who are younger want to be associated with the left. And so I think that the figures are very skewed. I think average Democrats who are not part of the hard left support Israel overwhelmingly. But the Democratic Party is also home to the very hard anti-American left, anti-Western left. And so when you include them in the Democratic Party, you see that skewed vote. Almost every Democrat I know supports Israel as enthusiastically as Republicans do, because Israel does in fact have democratic values. Now, if Peter was right, there'd be a comparative analysis. Who is more democratic, Israel or Gaza?
For what weaponry is causing these injuries, it's not entirely clear.
The type of injuries we are having is very severe. The magnitude of destruction of the human beings. Those bombs are intended to kill mass casualties of people. The bodies and faces are burned badly.
On the ground, it feels as if during this war, Israel is firmly fixed on stopping Hamas's rockets once and for all, regardless of the incredible civilian toll. Harry Fear, RT, Gaza.
And the Al-Aqsa television channel has now broadcast video showing Hamas fighters infiltrating Israeli territory to attack a guard post. 5 Israeli soldiers and 1 Hamas militant died in the shooting. Israeli troops responded by destroying the tunnel. Meanwhile, the IDF says its Iron Dome defense system intercepted 2 Hamas rockets over Tel Aviv. And Yuli Novak, a former Israeli Air Force officer, she believes her country's tactics are very hard to condone.
Who was more supportive of women's rights, Israel or Hamas? Who was more supportive of gay rights, Israel or Hamas?
Alan,
you know, if Peter were right, you would see people making, you would see, well, no, I'm surprised. You'd be surprised how many support Hamas. And let's talk about even the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is not known for its support of these liberal democratic values.
All right, I got your point.
That's correct. I think it's a hard left opposition.
You guys are sitting there and you're being very well behaved tonight. Peter, you're trying to jump in, but Mark, go ahead, jump in there. What is your reaction to what he said? Younger people tend to want to are more liberal and want to be Democrats, and so therefore.
Well, he's saying he's going a step beyond that. He's saying that they're hard left, that they're anti-West, anti-America, as if to say that to have a critical stance on Israel is to be anti-American. That's bizarre. It's a bizarre leap of logic.
And is it to be anti-Israel as well?
No. And that's the other piece of this that's confusing to me. The truth is that you can have a support of Israel's right to exist, as I do, at the same time having a stern critique of Israel for human rights violation against the Palestinian people. And that's what's happening.
You don't believe in Israel's. You don't believe in Israel's right to defend itself.
Alan, please, I didn't cut you off once. Let's model democratic values right now and let each other talk. I actually do agree with Israel's right to exist and to defend itself, but I don't frame the argument purely as Israel defending itself. We have to think about Israel as launching an offensive attack. Israel is launching a siege in Gaza. Israel continues to occupy Gaza by land, air, and sea. That's the issue here. But to your question, Don, about why young people tend to do this is for a few reasons. One, because they have access to social media. If you look at,
I think that to make a phone call or send a message or drop a tiny bomb minutes before you destroy an entire house, and to think that the fact that we notice them 5 or 10 minutes before is enough to sentence 5 or 10 or 25 people to death is something immoral. I don't think that even in times of war we can do whatever we want without boundaries.
Now, when somebody speaks out against the actions of their government, like you have, there will always be some people who consider you in some way to be betraying your native country. What is the public reaction to what you've had to say, and do you worry about any other repercussions?
The reaction, as you probably know and hear, are not very... but I'm not sure it's only the public. We see when our officials in our government, ministers in our government, calls to erase Gaza, to flatten whole neighborhoods in Gaza. Well, this is a sort of violence that have to be drawn down to the people. So the sentiments these days are very harsh. It's hard to make any criticism these days in Israel, but I do believe that this is our obligation as Israelis who care about our future to make those statements and to speak out loud.
Palestinian health officials.
All this data and disaggregate it, you see that young people are accessing images of the gross human rights violations, the awful abuses, the awful atrocities that are happening in Gaza, and it's hard to see that and not have a more critical posture against the state of Israel. Doesn't mean you don't want Israel to exist. Doesn't mean you don't want Israel to thrive. It just means that you have a critical stance and you want Palestinians to also live and thrive.
Okay, all right, stand by. Listen, guys, Alan, I have to get to a break. We're going to continue on with this after the break. Don't worry about it. And up next, we're going to talk about this as well. Israelis and Palestinians have been engaged in a conflict since really the day Israel became a nation back in 1948. And as we look at these live pictures now of the sun coming up in Gaza, we're going to try to figure out why the tensions are higher than ever now. Why is that? We'll get to that next.